I think any leader, any organization must think about reskilling and upskilling workers to adapt to this new future. And that means reimagining roles. And we need to probably get started now. It's not too late, but get started now at reimagining what that future organization is going to look like, because the next 3 to 5 years, put your seatbelts on. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Paige, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. We're doing something special today. We have not one, but two guests on the pod today. To start, we're joined by Patrick Lynch, PhD, AI faculty lead at Hult International Business School and TEDx keynote speaker. We will drop a link to that in the show notes. It's really good. Recommend checking it out. And if that wasn't enough, I also have Omar Shanti, HatchWorks AI CTO, to join us in the chat as we talk some AI. Welcome to the show, Patrick and Omar.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here, Matt.
Thanks. Likewise. Always great to share a platform with you both.
This is going to be fun. We got multiple guests. First time we're doing it on the pod. I'm excited for this. Patrick, you're contributing to a book on AI. The chapter you're talking about, Bridging Cultures, How Human AI Collaboration is Redefining Teams, and some really interesting stuff in there. You hit on some thought-provoking, kind of mind-bending concepts related to AI becoming not just a tool, but a teammate. And that's evolving into this new era of like human AI collaboration. And you even go so far to say we're in this rise of a new AI industrial revolution. And maybe we start there. What leads you to believe what we're seeing right now is on the level of an industrial revolution?
I mean, those are big concepts, and I'm certainly not the first to point out that we're in a new industrial revolution era. I think that we've been on the march here for Industry 4.0 really since the burgeoning of the internet starting, but we've clearly taken an inflection point now, building on the past almost 2 decades of big data analytics and understanding where it is that information into this new era where tools are just maturing. I think we can reflect on some examples in the past where these things weren't really working very well for us, but we are on the verge of seeing a future where we're going to be able to interact with them pretty much like a teammate. And I think that poses new questions to leaders and managers on what the shape of the organization is going to take now that these tools have certainly more capability and depth than ever before.
You mentioned some questions, some important questions we'll be asking. What is top of mind, do you think, Patrick? And then Omar, I'd be curious to get your take after.
I think we're just on this arc of seeing the way that these tools can help leaders make better decisions. Certainly the routine kinds of stuff, the mechanical and the simple analytical abilities of these tools have been clear and apparent. We're already seeing how we can rely on them to help us make sense of data, for example, in our databases. And I think that that's pretty much old news for those of us that have been in the industry. But this new idea that the tools will have almost an intuitive or empathetic kinds of abilities, those are new horizons that we're about to get to. When we think about, I don't know if there's a person out there that's been happy with any kind of a phone decision tree that they've been able to navigate before getting to a real human and customer service. We're seeing firms are going to be able to adapt now these tools into automating those kinds of tasks. And I think we're all going to be better for that. And that means that there's going to be new roles for the human workers to really engage into more strategic, creative kinds of contributions. And I think that's what marks that we're in kind of a new phase for the way that the tools interact and the kinds of industrial revolution impact that it's going to have.
Yeah, you mentioned the decision tree concept of where we're evolving from. We had a past guest who did conversational design, and she was talking just exactly about that. In the past, you had to define every potential edge case option that may happen, and it's completely shifted how they approach how they work. If anybody's interested, that's last season with Amber Prost, but a really interesting chat there. But Omar, from like a CTO perspective, like what questions are on your mind as it relates to this shift? How should folks be thinking about this?
I think it sort of depends on the frame that you see this generative AI phase coming in. I come from the perspective that generative AI in the realm of sort of companion to developer provides a set of tools akin to what something like grammar detection and spell check detection did all those many years ago.
Right.
And gradually, those are going to become so ingrained in our day-to-day lives that we eventually stop kind of recognizing the fact that they were novel. They will just be the sort of calculator equivalent to the middle school math class, only to developers building projects that potentially have multiple millions of dollars in impact. Some of the questions that I've got are, what is exactly the right formula? Because the formulas will change, I suppose. The question is more accurately, what are the right parameters to think of when unlocking this companion's value? A lot of devs sort of have this cultural artifact of this rubber ducky. You put it on your desk, and rubber ducky debugging is just talking to this rubber ducky, explaining your problems. And then in the process of explaining it, your rubber ducky will sort of solve it for you. At least it'll show you that by virtue of explaining this to the rubber ducky, you've been able to find the problem yourself. But what if the rubber ducky could talk back? And I think that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing this advent of a embedded generative AI model that is sort of present where you're coding, present where you're designing user stories, present on the edge. And that edge deployment, similar to the rubber ducky at your desk, just allows you to solve problems a lot quicker. So figuring out the right parameters, one of them being location and availability, another being multimodal input, another being situational awareness. Figuring these out allows us to build solutions that are most effective in enabling our devs and our sort of SDLC lifecycle members to contribute to the software in a differentiated way.
So Patrick, have you heard of the rubber ducky approach? I've never heard of that. It's such a cool concept.
I think that's calls for a whole nother chapter.
Yeah.
But what Omar and I have been discussing about, in this rubber ducky, I think it's a great example in this imagining that scenario where the rubber ducky starts to be personified naturally by workers. I mean, the rubber ducky now becomes so much more than a tool. It is in fact a teammate, and I think that's what we're seeing is what are the possibilities then when it does move beyond something that we saw in the past, like a simple calculator, to something that we're really collaborating with, and that's a good example because the rubber ducky is talking back, and we just have a natural tendency then to imbue expectations for what the rubber ducky can do for us, if we can imagine that, and I think that's going to spark new creativity and new options, for workers across the board.
So I have this vision in my head of, I don't know if you're familiar with people that have Jeeps. If they like the Jeep, they give them a rubber ducky. So I'm thinking of like the split personalities of all the rubber duckies talking to you at once. Maybe it evolves to that where you have, we talk about agents, personifying the agents there with us. They have a specific task and whatnot. But I want to get into in your chapter, you talk about the four faces of AI and artificial intelligence and the shift to kind of this, era of AI coworkers. Patrick, can you take us through these? Because I think it's a really kind of interesting way to think about and approach AI as we start to work with it on a more collaborative plane.
I think this can be helpful for any manager out there or
Mhm.
leader just trying to decipher this because it's a lot to take in. But researchers, not my own work, but this is Wong and Rust, as far back as least as 2018, they outlined four faces of AI, or what I call, Omar and I
Mhm.
call four faces. Mechanical, these are going to be the routine kinds of things that we see AI taking over. Analytical, it can make sense of patterns. Intuitive, it can start to project and do some kind of predictive analytics for us. And then empathetic is being the highest level. Those four faces of AI are a progression of maturity that we should expect and can start to see in some of these tools. And as they move up into that higher echelon, that's really where the opportunity to start to see them more as teammates and collaborators take shape.
Nice. In the okay, I want to try something because I was looking at the empathetic intelligence one. Have you heard of the tool Hume AI? Either of you? It looks like Patrick has.
But
So
for the company that creating the pin, for example, that a wearable has been it's certainly ahead of its time.
yeah, Hume. So I believe this one's separate from the pin. I'm
Uh,
going to
uh,
try to show this off in the Hopefully the audio comes through. If it doesn't, we'll just cut this out and it will be forever forgotten. But they based an LLM where you can actually talk to it and it registers your emotions
Ah,
and comes back with the inflection relative to how you're talking to it. So let's give this a try. This may be fun. There we go. Share sound. So this should work. Okay. So for those on YouTube, you can actually see this, but Hume AI foundational voice models for any interface, and we're going to talk to a personality. Any preference? We have Aurora, Kara, Whimsy, Patrick. Who do you want?
oh,
Stella.
Stella sounds great.
Let's do Stella. Okay, we're gonna start a call. Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing marvelously well. Thank you for asking. How may I be of service to you?
Yeah, I'm kind of excited. I'm going to the beach this weekend with some friends and just excited to get down there.
The beach. What a delightful plan. Remember, it's not just about the destination, but the company you keep. Do try to savor each moment. It's a rare and precious gift.
Yeah, it really is. I'm a little bit sad about it because I usually go to the beach with my dog and play with him, but he recently passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. Losing a pet is never easy, and the beach can certainly bring back memories. Perhaps this weekend can be a time for reflection and joy too. May you find comfort in the waves and peace in your heart.
Okay, so I just muted it, so she's not listening anymore. But the thing that got me with this, and what triggered from what you were talking about, the kind of emotional side, those on YouTube can see it's actually picking up in the beginning that I had excitement, I had interest when I was talking about going to the beach. But then when I talked about, and my dog is alive, my dog's sitting right over there, so no issue there. But then it got this notion of kind of sympathy, and you heard the tone changing in the voice, which is pretty compelling. And you talk about kind of giving it this human personification. This is leading to some of that. But curious y'all's reaction to this tool.
I think it's really fascinating the level to which sentiment analysis has sort of gotten to. Historically, sentiment analysis has sort of been a classification sort of problem where given a utterance or a series of utterance, we would classify that with some degree of probability. But now we're using that as sort of the basic building block because with an app like Hume, what we're seeing is not only are we just classifying, but then we are building on top of. And when we talk about building a companion, building AI, imagine that AI is able to sort of identify your attitude when it comes to risk or the stress level that you have, and then offer solutions that vary based on that. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've got a friend, we've got a plan, that plan might fall through, and we say, how about we try something adventurous? Depending on the mood of your friend, they might say yes, or they might say no, let's just stay at home, let's stick to something basic. So imagine the equivalent of a AI program saying, there's a library for that. We can just use an off-the-shelf solution. Or actually, I think if you were to build this kind of AI, there's a gap in the marketplace, and that maybe there's a way to sort of productize this or contribute it to open source or so on. So I think being able to identify an individual's emotional state is a core part of being a companion and can help sort of unlock better outcomes by knowing what to ask without overwhelming.
Yeah, that's great. And that's why we got the CTO on here for that nuanced perspective. But Patrick, I'm curious, have you seen any solutions like this? And where does this start to weave in? You talk about this empathetic intelligence. It starts to kind of imbue some of those characteristics to a certain extent.
The low-hanging fruit, it would be customer service applications that take advantage of this. And I think that's a good example. However, much further that needs to go, it's way better than the press one if this, press two if that on decision
Right.
trees. And already financial service companies have been taking advantage of this even in earlier days. Companies have been able to effectively adopt these kinds of solutions, which have been getting much better reviews by their own customers, and elevate the human customer service agents to really deal with more strategic kinds of difficult problems. But you can imagine applications like these really helping customers to get to a solution quicker. I'm also familiar with some of these applications that are in fact helping with therapy. It's not It's not appropriate for maybe all, but many get benefits from this. And we already know that companion bots have been one of the most developed app as these kinds of customized bots have
Mhm.
become available in the marketplace. So there's a real need for this. And I think that it just shows you they're only going to get better from here.
Yeah,
And maybe, Matt,
that
we could,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead,
Matt,
Omar.
but maybe we could take that as an opportunity to shine a quick light on an individual end user use case where this kind of tool could offer differentiated value. Take the persona of a quick service restaurant, right, with the drive-through. Very common use case these days for using generative AI or using, natural language processing in general. A lot of these kind of quick service restaurants are kind of characterized by some of the same pain points, which are an employee workforce which has not gotten the most out of. They're sort of performing the same tasks day in, day out, and potential large lines, potential error mismatches, and errors in sort of order fulfillment and so on. So it seems to be an area that has been rife for digital augmentation, and a lot of people have been leading with that hypothesis. But I use the word digital augmentation there because at no point really will the AI, at least in the foreseeable future, be able to fully accommodate all of the sensitive requests that a user might have. We've
Mhm.
already seen AIs be able to adopt multilinguality, which is, a really fantastic thing. But if it's something like a voice-based drive-through, then how are we supposed to accommodate individuals who have a hard time hearing or a hard time speaking? Being able to sort of identify based on sentiment the sort of use cases that are sensitive and that require that catered differentiated touch can really help unlock repeated value for clients who are adopting these in their end user experiences, can turn a potentially painful experience into a differentiated memorable one, and that can really create champions within the clientele.
Yeah, while we're on the topic of use cases, another one I like. So I have an 8-year-old daughter struggling a little bit with math, and I'm trying to kind of help her along. I feel like there's so much opportunity there where you can kind of have somebody that knows what level you're at to the point where just demonstrating can be kind of sympathetic, knowing when you're struggling, knowing when you're excelling, kind of understanding what drives you. I think that's another really cool opportunity that there's a lot of potential for. Patrick, any others off the top of mind for you?
I think that you hit on it. And I think education is a huge opportunity for these tools. There are already companies that are effectively integrating this into adaptive learning. Look, we've been stuck in old models, whether we're talking about educating students or even training our workforces, which is a one size fits all. Here's the curriculum, these are the learning objectives, and it's very canned. By integrating these kinds of solutions and maybe even compelling with these kinds of voices and be intonation and sense of change, we may have adaptive learning that can speed the way that individuals learn the kinds of things that they need to perform even better. And I think this
Mhm.
is really a glasses half full kind of a story where we're going to be able to get better performance both out of our systems and out of our employees or out of our students learning through these kinds of applications. So I'm definitely bullish on that future.
Yeah, that's right in your wheelhouse on the education side of things. And you mentioned the example earlier with kind of the therapy aspect of it. And not to keep episode dropping, but we had Catherine Von John, previous chief strategy officer of its Salesforce Innovation. She started a new company called Tough Day. And it basically is that it's if somebody needs to talk to somebody, they're looking to leverage AI. The interesting thing they found though is people are opening up more to the AI, having longer conversations, more in-depth conversations than with a human. I thought that was really interesting. Just kind of a nugget of information, you know, and I don't know if it's just the aspect it's not a real human, so you can open up more of what it is, but it was an interesting nugget they found.
I think what's interesting about that, Matt, is people should understand, and I understand there's some skepticism out there about how real or effective these systems can be. But we are hardwired as humans to effectively interact with
Mm.
these machines as other social beings. And I mean, you don't have to look very far into science fiction for what that might look like. You know, I keep telling my own kids to go back and look at the movie Her. And I understand that it can get far fetched because obviously you're trying to be entertained in that kind of format, but you can see the glimpses of this. And the truth is, we don't need something even that elaborate. Tamagotchi toys is one of the things that we talk about in our chapter.
Mhm.
And people have just a real emotive effect, even with simple kinds of digital interfaces. So you can only imagine what's going to happen as these interfaces become more sophisticated and more natural for us to be interacting with. It will bring about emotions for ourselves. So just natural ways of having a social reciprocity between yourself and these entities. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to go over the edge here. I'm not saying that they even need to be sentient, but it's just a natural human response. It really is more a reflection of what it does for us.
Yeah. And so I think the next logical spot, we're kind of painting this rosy future of all the great stuff, but actually getting to that point where you have AI as coworkers and they're fulfilling that function. It's going to be a progression. It's going to have to evolve a bit. And I thought one interesting thing back to the chapter you're contributing with, you introduced this idea of the AI quadrant. So orchestrating human AI collaboration. And so just to visualize this for folks listening, you have the y-axis, which is measuring the AI's charisma. You have the x-axis, which is measuring AI capability. And I'm going to go from bottom left and around. So Castaway is kind of low charisma, low capability. The Charmer is high charisma, low capability. The Champion is high in both. And then the Cog is low charisma, high capability. But take us through this way of thinking. And do you see it as an evolution of going from Castaway to Champion? Does each kind of serve a role? What does that look like in the future organization?
We call this the AI Quartet. We
Yeah.
understand the kinds of intelligences that AI has from the work that was done previously, but I think more attention needs to be put on how we're going to be perceiving them as teammates. And so this is a concept that we developed to think about these different quadrants as ways that people will be interacting with AI. Unfortunately, right now, most of the tools that we have been castaways. They don't have very good capabilities, nor are we really relating to them. And they become often a sense of frustration. We've had high expectations of what these things can do, but it doesn't take very long to see that we've pressed the limits and we're asking a question that it really can't help us with. That goes on to even the charmer. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. It looks,
Yeah.
we have this expectation that it could do more, but in fact, the capability is really low. Most voice assistants right now lead to this, where people want to, smash the device because, you know, it's polite, but it's not really giving me an answer. I think the idea is that we're going to see a lot more cogs and eventually charmers. So yes, it's a progression. I think by design or by capability that we have these champions that are truly collaborative. I don't know if we have a lot of actual examples of that today, but I think that we're getting there. I think we're going to see a lot more cogs, some greater capability, and then I think that they'll be imbued with these kinds of features, maybe to our detriment. Sometimes we might think that the tool can do more than it does when it solves that problem for us with the monthly numbers. So it's not a one size fits all. I think it's more a model that talks about the way that we might perceive these tools, and is a caution to managers that whether or not they believe it's the case today, very soon workers will start to be aligning with these agents or bots and relating to them as teammates. But you can't really get away from a teammate that's so entwined into the operation. I mean, I think that there's both benefits and risks as these tools take on one of these personas as we discuss them.
Omar, what's your thought here? Personifying the AI in this kind of quartet manner. How do you think that jives? And then also, where do you think we are? Have you seen anything that's kind of fitting into one of those champion type categories, or what areas do you think we have right now?
When Patrick was first explaining to me this idea of the quartet, I immediately thought of the y-axis, which sort of represents charisma, as representing a form of appearance, and the x-axis of capability as representing a form of substance. And in a way, that's an oversimplification because there is substance in charisma. It's not just a layer of paint on a car with no engine, but to actually have a really aerodynamic body and a car that's optimized for, performing well on the turn and so on is a feature of engineering. even if we do fall back on this appearance versus substance mechanism, I think it would be wrong to dismiss the effective value, effective within A, the emotional value that the appearance will have on the end users. And I think what Patrick is doing is really centering in that personification and the associated psychology of personification that will sort of be a differentiator for this space moving forward. Where my mind goes is I wonder whether the go-to-market of a lot of companies has fallen more on prioritizing and privileging the side of charisma than capability for a number of reasons. It's easier to go viral as a charismatic substance than to go viral as a substance that maybe outperforms on the latest benchmarks, or that is able to boast a Turing complete operating framework or any other sort of technical feat. It's easier to captivate the world's imagination by telling fairy tales as a pirate than it is to code a very efficient Fibonacci algorithm that optimizes for memory, for example.
Mhm.
And what I think we will gradually see, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but my sort of perception is the overrepresentation that we currently see in Charmer will be met by an equivalent sort of move to the right in a drive towards champions as people look to develop more of that AI capability. And so we'll end up with a landscape where Cog would be the least represented, Charmer slightly more, champion is where everyone aspires to get to but likely won't get there, and Castaway is where everyone sort of ends up trying to achieve that sort of arc. I might be, and I'll call myself out for this, I might be underestimating the difficulty in sort of managing the charismatic side and encoding charisma into a bot. So please keep me honest there, Patrick. And I'll also kick it back to you, Patrick, and ask, how you see charisma as a cultural phenomena based on the dev culture that you're part of, your demographic, even your subculture within the broader society. How do we problematize charisma? We've already seen a variety of models, most famously X's Grok model being charismatic in being a rogue. I believe that's like how Elon Musk describes it. So I suppose I'd be curious, do you see charisma as a pluralistic idea, or is there a standard set of charismatic features or a single charismatic persona that we are driving to in the market?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. And I think that we see these kinds of examples. You brought up several. We all remember how Microsoft Office, and I guess I give him credit for trying this out with Clippy, but Clippy quickly wore out because maybe it was, in fact, this sort of a charmer attempt. It had very limited
Mhm.
capability, and it was really just sort of window dressing to what we really wanted to get done. And some of us can remember that, one of the first things that you did is you opened up Office was close out Clippy or just shut it down altogether. I think that there's really two parts of this. I think that you're hitting on the pragmatic, tactical objectives to achieve these things, which I think the dev community is going to take inspiration from some of the examples like what Matt shared earlier in the podcast, that these systems, it's possible now to start to mimic this. And we're already seeing, some examples of success. But I am also wary that, or mindful that people will have this perception, whether or not it's the fact. People will have these emotions toward the technology, whether or not it's capable or not. And so I think that more I'm looking at the future of work where we're collaborating with these bots, and whether we liked it or not, even in the big data era, just because data was available, managers were in a double bind. There was an expectation that you knew or should have known because the data were available to you. Now, we all know that's hindsight bias, but this is the way that many companies were run, and indeed maybe are still being run today. Just because it was on the dashboard does not mean that the information was communicated in a way that I understood it or was actionable. And I foresee that this is going to happen now at scale as we rely further on bots and agents to do work that are critical path, to our success or whatever our strategies are. So I see the model as both a display of the possibilities with a view of what the potential good and potential risks are as the bots start to take on different personas in our workplaces.
Mhm. So all of this reminds me of an example. So we were just speaking at the Marine Logistics Command. They did an AI forum because they figured there's so much going on in AI. We don't know enough. So let's bring folks in from industry and let's talk about it. But I had a really good question from the individual that leads effectively analytics within this group. And we were talking about RAG. And he brought up a very standard question. What do you do if it's giving an inaccurate response, which goes to just, basic hallucination, which I think most people understand now. But the discussion we're having hits into this kind of dynamic where I have high charisma, but low, accuracy. It's giving me a wrong answer, but then you lose trust. And then that hurts adoption, which is bad, right? So you can imagine if I'm asking questions of my data with a RAG solution and I get an inaccurate response, maybe I do that 1, 2, maybe 3 times. Then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it the way I trust. And then you don't have adoption. You need adoption for these things to evolve. So it's like this element of, I'm thinking of back to personifying it like a human. It's like that charismatic, maybe, you know, sleazy car salesman, right? I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. So I think that's going to be a dynamic that we have to figure out a way to get over, whether it's technically a technical solution to it or just how we approach it organizationally.
I'm very mindful of that, and I guess it is caution that as these systems become even more embedded into what it is that we do, unfortunately, that sleazy car salesman, you can't easily get rid of them. You couldn't get rid of a coworker you didn't trust already very easily, but
Yeah,
there
true.
might be ways of working around that. Now you're talking about systems that you are relying on your critical path decision making, and so I think that's that's certainly a shot across the bow for all of us developers to be mindful. This charisma
Mhm.
side matters, and you're going to need to probably match that with capability and set expectations appropriately about what the systems can and cannot do. So that's a real human sort of expectation setting that goes along with what the tech is possible or capable of doing.
Yeah. So
And
I'm
I,
curious. Go ahead, Omar. Let's get your take.
I couldn't agree more. I think historically we have been trained to expect not to get an answer as opposed to get the wrong answer. And
Mhm.
as a result of sort of decades of design thinking, we have not necessarily had to analyze how that answer has been arrived at because it's irrelevant for us to do our day to day. I don't need to know why the database gives me this answer as long as it gives me that answer and I have confidence that it does. We are used to grounding to some extent, but to go through the chain of thinking or the chain of reasoning that has historically been algorithmic, but is these days increasingly generative and sort of stochastic, I think that needs to be evolved. I was in the blockchain space at a time when the biggest bottleneck was actually the user experience side of things. And I think, Matt, what you're hitting on and what Patrick is centering in a very kind of psychological way is focusing on the UX behind building these experiences in ways that build trust, that empower business outcomes, that are adaptable, and that sort of meet engineers or development teams wherever they are, whether that is programmatically in the form of the IDE or in GitHub or whatever software they're using, or in terms of content by, sort of meeting them where they are in terms of what they know, what they don't know, what they hope to know, how to get there, and so on. But I think fundamentally there's a paradigm shift in the way that we convey information that sort of needs to happen while we're in this trust building phase. I think gone are the days where we could say, here's the answer, trust me. And now there's this process of almost, here's this process and here's how I've arrived there. Let me bring you along with me on the journey, maybe empower you to see how to solve this problem for yourself if you would like to, or for you to tell me how I should adopt the way, I say me in this case in the persona of the AI, how the end user should tell the AI how to adapt the way that it solves a problem to best solve that user's specific pain point. And I think leaning in on transparency is one of the cornerstones of building trust. And I think, as Patrick was saying in his comments, finding ways to do that in a user-focused way is really the name of the game
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And you mentioned chain of thought reasoning, and this will be old news because it'll be a couple weeks later in the crazy hype cycle we're in. But I don't know if y'all saw the ChatGPT, the O1 model just launched, and curious if y'all have had a chance to play with it. But What's interesting about it is it's engineered to take its time, think logically, kind of break down the different steps of how it's going to approach it, and then it's providing a response versus just kind of zero shot, just shoot out the answer very quickly. Have either of y'all tried it yet? And any thoughts on it so far?
I,
Yeah,
I
so
haven't I haven't had a chance just to unpack that, but the spirit of this and what Omar is calling our attention to, and I think that we agree is the governance around this, and the ability to not assume that black box is something that we can't interpret is absolutely critical. And I think that will
Mhm.
be something that we see more attention on, and rightly we should, so that we can have confidence in the kinds of outcomes and at least be able to trace it back. Most of the hype right now about AIs, assuming that humans will blindly, accept these answers, miss that we still need absolute critical thinking to go back and understand
Mhm.
how that outcome has come about, and understand whether or not their assumptions and biases are in fact aligned with what we needed.
Yeah. Omar, have you had a chance to try it out yet?
similarly, I've not, but I've seen quite a few of my go-to LinkedIn and Twitter and Hacker News influencers share their feedback. And
Yeah.
from what I can tell, it's the sort of continued promise that we've been seeing over the past few months in the space of
Mhm.
making GPTs that have broader token windows that are able to retain more context and therefore achieve more personalization. In this case, as you rightly mentioned, Matt, there's this direction towards adapting the inner working of the GPT so that it leans more on accuracy as opposed to on speed. And I think
Yeah.
that trade-off was not always deterministic, but is a response to the kind of trajectory of the space and the need to reestablish trust. So I think that is a crucial step forward in building more lasting experiences and sort of productionizing GPT products. And ultimately, I think as this continues to sort of become our as the new sort of level and the benchmark set by this model continue to sort of bring the market up, just like a rising tide lifts all ships. That's going to tag into the existing trend of integrating GPT broadly. So another one of the hype cycle elements these days is Replit, the code editor, which Matt, I'd love to sort of pass the mic to you to speak about. I know you've had some great experiences with it. I think the trend of enabling bigger models in more places for more people is just going to continue supercharged.
Yeah, I think we may do a kind of micro CTO episode on that, but it's early days, right? The Replit tool. What I love about it is it's logically thinking through an approach. It's integrated to where it can actually build everything in the IDE. And it's not doing anything crazy complex. It's simple web apps right now. But just the fact that it's thinking through the steps logically, it's kind of building out the requirements, then it's going and executing that, is going from this evolution. I kind of like to think of it as it starts at performing tasks, then it moves to workflows, then it can move to entire job functions. Does it then go to facilitating entire functional areas in an organization, or is there an entire organization one day that's led like this? And I know we see Klarna in the news, that they're getting rid of Salesforce and Workday, cutting workforce, and they're kind of the golden child for AI adoption right now. So, who knows how much of that is just the marketing side to play into it as they look to go public, but they're leaning into it. And, there probably will be companies to follow. But I'm curious, Patrick and Omar, to kind of wrap us up here, what type of cultures will be best suited to adopt this new evolution of kind of the AI coworker thing we're talking about? Which ones will be best suited?
I I think it's so broad and so deep. I don't think that there is another, any industry that couldn't be touched by this. There have been plenty of people smarter than me that are saying that this is as if you have access to electricity and there is nothing that hasn't been touched by this. I think any leader, any organization must think about reskilling and upskilling
Mm,
workers to adapt to this new future. That means reimagining roles. Uh, while there are going to be fits and starts and successes and failures, that's natural with any kind of new technology or tool. We can quickly envision the day that there are going to be tasks that can be automated, probably better for the worker and for the organization. And so there are going to be new questions on the human kinds of capabilities. I'm talking about this in the TED Talk and other places about unlocking creativity. And we need to probably get started now. It's not too late, but get started now at reimagining what that future organization is going to look like, because the next 3 to 5 years, put your seatbelts on. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah. What about you, Omar? Is there a particular type of culture or any nuance about a culture that you think will be best suited to adopt AI into its ranks?
When I start projects, one of the first exercises I like to do with the team is ways of working or a team agreement session. And thinking about that now in hindsight, we all come into a room, we come up with sort of a contract for how we wish to engage with each other, what each of our responsibilities are, who we're accountable to, and so on. And it strikes me that what is that except for a prompt engineering exercise? Only in this case, I am the artificial intelligence, not that artificial, though a little bit more organic. Um, Sort of the framework that we have over here is a framework of accountability, nimbleness, responsiveness, and transparency. Being able to articulate things that we want and being able to sort of reach a shared agreement around that. A lot of the exercise of prompt engineering is very much those same few things. It's kind of a common held wisdom in the space that orchestration and sort of productionizing a model, at least orchestration and building the system around the model tends to be the easy part. The hard part is sort of the prompt engineering work. And some even estimate that 80% of the complexity sort of resides there. And with that in mind, this process of incorporating generative AI into the workplace culture really requires that sort of nimble adaptiveness, requires being empirical led so that you can understand where the model's performing well, where it can be adapted, and then sort of creating a feedback loop by which you can take those empirics and then plug that back into the model. Really, what we're talking about is sort of a sophisticated software delivery lifecycle based on communication and data. And the more digitally mature a company is, the better that they will be able to use generative AI in their workplaces. For as novel and powerful as generative AI is, it's not the island that some people think it is, nor is it a way to just parachute onto the top of the mountain. Generative AI comes on the back of decades of software development and data foundation work and classical machine learning. As a result, the better a company is with those three attributes, the better position they will be to use generative AI to unlock delivery in their own company.
Yeah, I hope the y'all listening caught that bit about that was really cool. That idea of the contract when you're starting a team, feeding that to AI that you're leveraging in your team. That's a really interesting approach. I wonder if, you know, is it going to be more so cultures that are starting out new where it's in there from the beginning are going to be better off versus those trying to graft it on? I think it's really, up to leaders in a big way to lead this effort. But great conversation, Patrick and Omar. This was cool getting to do three people. I love the different perspectives. We'll definitely be doing this again, and let us know what you thought about it, having multiple folks in here. But Patrick, where can people find you? You mentioned the TEDx talk. We'll definitely provide a link to that, and then the book that'll be coming out as well.
I would love to connect with folks. I'm looking for leaders that are interested in talking about these ideas and things that they're adopting or struggling with. You can find me at patrickdlynch.com or on LinkedIn, which is also Patrick Lynch, PhD. But, go there. I think there's going to be more forthcoming with us collaborating to bring these insights to a wider audience.
Great. And then Omar, as always, folks can find you on LinkedIn if they want to reach out there too and have a conversation. But thank you, Patrick and Omar, for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com.